auditorium here. Glad to be here, and got great sound, and feel like I'm a little back here a little ways. I'm going to move this up so I get a little closer to you guys.
Don't lean too heavy on that.
I don't want to fall off. Just make sure you have it recorded when you, Just make sure you have it recorded if I fall off the stage. So
Yeah.
the media will have a lot of fun with that.
Oh, yeah.
I can just see the headlines right now. So, well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I appreciate it. I'm going to hopefully we can have a conversation, just talk. Before that, I'll give you a little bit of background. Maybe some things you know, maybe some things you don't know. But I grew up on a ranch outside of Mesquite, Nevada. Anybody know where Mesquite, Nevada is? Been ever driven through there? About 20 miles south of Mesquite. And I really enjoyed the way I grew up. I had a really good life out there with my brothers. I've got a whole bunch of brothers and a whole bunch of sisters. And we all feel it a great privilege to be able to be raised on a ranch outside of town, where we were taught to work and taught where our the good Lord has provided for us, and how the earth works, and how we have to produce, and many, many other things. And the land there is a lot different than here, I will say that. It's pretty arid, very dry. There's a lot of cactuses, and a lot of rocks, and a lot of dirt. And some years it's worse than others. But when we have a drought down there, we really don't even know it, because it's just normal. And my dad runs about 600 head of cattle on the range out there, and it takes about 100 acres for one cow to survive. And so in order for you to raise cattle, and you have to, those that have raised cattle know that it takes a decent amount of cattle to even just provide enough living for one family. And so in order to do that, you have to graze over a large area. And the water is so far away. You've got the Virgin River that runs through the valley there. And then you've got the mountains that have some springs on it, some artesian springs, and there's just no water in between. You can go about 25 miles south of where a ranch house is, and you can get to the Lake Mead. But there's just no water. And so my family came into that area in 1877. They began to graze their cattle up on the mountains, and they began to develop those waters, creating waterheads and water troughs, because they were artesian springs, but very small springs. And the cattle were able to graze around those waters. Well, eventually they wanted to run more cattle and needed to run more cattle, so they started to pipe these waters down maybe a wash, and they would get another water trough down there, and then they were able to water around there. Well, my dad, in his 75 years, he's 75 years old, now he has spread that watering watering system where it covers about 30 miles, and it's all over. And he maintains these waters. That's pretty much what he does almost every day. He maintains these waters to make sure that the cattle have water, and they can use the benefit in the desert as long as they have water. And it has also created where there's the wildlife replenishes, where there's tons of hunting and good camping, and there's roads that he maintains. And he's made, basically, my family, along with my father and his time, has basically made it so this land not only produces, but also so that it benefits everybody. It benefits the hunter, the hiker. It benefits the wildlife. It benefits those who just want to go out and enjoy it on an ATV. It benefits, of course, the cattle and the other, the deer and whatever, the longhorn sheep. It benefits all of them. that's what my family's done now on that range for 46 years, since 1877. And many of you know that in 2014, the federal government came in with, you might not know the details, but they came in with 213 armed federal agents and surrounded my family's home, put snipers on the hills, and threatened us while they were destroying our water infrastructure and destroying our ranch, while they were shooting cattle from the helicopter, burying them in the desert, while they were leaving the baby calves out in the desert to die, and destroying our fences and our corrals and all of this water, our entire ranch. While this was going on, they were threatening that if we resisted in any way, that they would kill us. And we began to film them. We began to show the people across the country what they were doing to us. And people started coming from all over the country. And as far as we can tell, there was people from every state in the Union, including Hawaii and Alaska, that came. And they stood around my family and basically said, hey, we're not going to put up with this. We're not going to allow another Waco. We're not going to allow another Ruby Ridge. And we, as a little ranching family, were the beneficiaries of patriots from all over the country coming and surrounding us and saying no to the government that was out of control. And of course, this happened after about a 20-plus legal battle with the federal government, where they claimed that they could come in and take the land and the resources of the people in the state of Nevada. And they've done this all across the West. And I could give you so much detail that we could be here for hours and hours and hours about the legalities of it, about whose rights it truly is. But I'll leave this with you. And then as I move on through this presentation, if you will, if you want to call it that. But the founders of this country made it very clear that if the federal government was able to come into the states and to tax the people and to control their land and resources, that they would put the states and the people in what they called undue obedience. They would put the people to where they become dependent on the federal government or beholden to the federal government, and it would ruin liberty. And so they put certain things in the Constitution that made it so the federal government could function the way they needed to function, but not overstep or destroy the liberties of the people. And some of those are found in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. Others are found in Article 1, Section 17. And I'll give you a little bit of detail on that one. In Article 1, 817, it requires the federal government, if they need property inside a state, and for the enumerated purposes, who knows what I mean by when I say enumerated? Anybody have an idea right here? You want to know what does it mean?
I don't know it any better than you do.
Well, enumerated basically means the authorized things in the Constitution, right? The things that are authorized in the Constitution. And there's a whole bunch of things, especially in Article 1:8. It lists a whole bunch of authorities that the Constitution or that the federal government has. And then the 10th Amendment was just mentioned here. The 10th Amendment basically says that if it's not listed in the Constitution, then the federal government doesn't have authority, right? And so it's very clear. And so in order for the federal government to come in and own property inside a state, there was rules that they had to follow. And rule number 1 is they had to get permission from the state legislature. Makes sense, right? So the state legislature has to approve it. So let's say they want to make a military base out here somewhere, and there's some land that seems to be like a good place where they need it. They can't just take it. They have to go get the state legislature to approve that property. And then they have to purchase it. They have to purchase it and give the rightful owner what the value of the property is. And then third, they can only use it for the enumerated purposes. And it actually lists them. It says for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Now the reason that is in there is because it protects the people. It protects the states also. It protects the people from the federal government just coming in and claiming, quote unquote, 63% of the land inside of Idaho. Right? It wasn't supposed to happen the way it is. It was very clear. And we do. The federal government claims 63% of the land mass in Idaho. And 72% of the subsurface mineral rights. And it's detrimental to us, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about that later. Well, to make a very long story short, my father and the other ranchers in that area, knowing and seeing the danger that was coming upon them, they began to, this was long before 2014, this was kind of in the late 80s, they began to study and try to understand where their rights came from. And they understood that the protections of their ranch and their property was found in the Constitution of the United States. That it was found right here. And so they began to stand on it. And ultimately led to them saying no to the federal government when they tried to come and make my father's ranch a mitigation area for the desert tortoise, and said that he can no longer ranch on his ranch. He said no. And it led to a legal battle that went on for about 20 years. And then in 2014, I explained a little bit what happened there. And then the Patriots came, people from all across the country came and protected my family. And then they left. The federal government actually left, and that was an amazing thing to see. They actually knew that the people were serious about defending liberty at the ranch. And then, a couple of years later, they decided they were going to arrest all of us. So they come in, sneak in, and we're all now back to our lives, doing just raising. We all, my brothers, my dad, we all have, we're married, we have multiple children. I have 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls, and my brothers, I've got brothers that have a couple less than me, and other brothers that have more than me. So we're family people. We believe in family. We believe in taking care of our family. We believe in getting married and having a partnership with our wife. And they came in and arrested us. And for 2 years, they put us in federal prisons. And for myself and most of us, we spent about half of that time in solitary confinement, because they tried to break us to get us to take a plea deal to admit to something that we didn't do. And they did that by throwing us in solitary confinement, and the entire time they never once allowed us to have any physical contact with our wives or children. Not once. They tried to break us, but they were not able to. And they weren't able to because, one, we had confidence that we were right. We knew we were right. And 2, we knew we were right with God. And we knew that even if it cost us our liberty for the rest of our lives, because the minimum sentencing on the charges that they gave us was 106 years. So we knew if they were able to accomplish what they want, then we would spend the rest of our life in prison, and probably a good amount of that would probably be in solitary confinement. But we knew we had to stand. We knew it was more than just about some cattle in the desert. We knew it was about liberty. We knew we had to stand. And also, we were able to see things clear back then, 6 years ago, and it gave us a head start. And they're the same things that you are now seeing. And I'm not saying that there might be several of you that have understood before now what's happening. But the things that are happening now to everybody are what we saw 6 years ago, or maybe even we understood. My dad might have even understood it clear back in the 80s, because that's what was happening to my family. And so I feel like it gave me an advantage, a little bit of a head start, to understand a little bit more about what was happening. And also, because we came out of those prisons The whole time my dad's cattle were still on the range. My mom was doing the best she could, our wives were doing the best they could. Because of that, we came out and we were not even convicted of even a misdemeanor. We beat them twice in court, one in Oregon and then in Nevada. And they put the best attorneys they could on our case. They spent $100 million trying to prosecute us. Imagine that. Imagine what this little town could do with $100 million. And they just wasted it on just trying to make a point so that they could put us in prison because my dad said no. And so that's my background. That's why I'm here, in a sense. I believe that I understand what's happening. I believe that I understand what is happening and what a lot of what's going to happen in Idaho. And it caused me to stand up and say, look, we have to stop this right here. We have to stop it right here. If we don't, Idaho will not be the Idaho that we love. It will not be the idea of a conservative people that love God, that want to worship God, that love to be free, that love to trade with each other, that want to freely travel, that want to decide what we do with our time when we get up, not somebody else. And if we don't protect that in Idaho, then it will be lost. It is already under great threat. And we will become another Oregon, another Washington, another California. And that is a reality. And so that's why I decided to run for governor. And I'm here to report to you that our campaign is going very, very well. Very well. It's amazing the support we're getting weekly, daily. It's amazing. We keep seeing different polls that different people are running. And they, surprisingly, even to me, they have me at the top. Or even sometimes completely exceeding everybody else in the race. And now I know polls are just a snapshot in time. But I tell you that to help you understand that I am a leading candidate here in this race. And that if we continue to do what we're doing, I do believe that we can capture the Republican nomination in May. And so, with that being said, I want to be able to just have a conversation here. And for anybody to, almost there, anybody wants to have a question, I don't care what it is. I'm not like a candidate where you have to write your questions down there. They choose which one they're going to answer, and then I answer. I would say the only thing I won't answer is some private question between my wife and I. That's about it. And I think you can understand and respect that, right? So, with that being said, let's start right here. And we got a mic right rolling around. Thank you.
I think my voice is... Can you hear me? Yeah.
This is a great room.
Ammon, where's your mother from?
So my mother is from Gooding, Idaho. Yeah, Gooding, Idaho, and I have a bunch of family that live in Gooding, Idaho, and so I have Idaho roots. Absolutely.
And how long have you been?
I've been here for almost 7 years. I live in Ammon, so not very far away from you. And I love that. I love Idaho, and I live here about almost 7 years.
And then I have one last question I want to hog. Back on 14, when the standoff was going on, where were a majority of the Patriots from? I
would say, besides the local people there, probably Idaho had as many as any other state, or more than any other state, besides probably Utah and Idaho, or Nevada was there. Definitely Idaho. There was a tremendous amount of people that got in their vehicles and drove down and stood with our family in 2014. Absolutely.
So you have a long history of the roots here.
I do. And I have a great love for the people of Idaho, and now I've become one. So, thank you. Right back here.
I just want to correct something you said. You said you're one of the leading candidates. You're the only candidate.
Thank you. Right here.
So, did the federal government go to every state and ask for the forest? How did they get the force and BLM?
So the question was, so did the federal government go to every state and get the forest, and how did they get the forest? So that's a really great question. And I'm going to answer it the best I can in a fairly short period of time, because there's a lot of detail. But you notice that all around where there was irrigation, and there's waters, and there was land, all of that's private, right? You look at a map of Idaho, and you see that that's private ground. And then right outside that, all of a sudden, then it becomes federally controlled land. And you notice I say federally controlled. I don't say BLM. I don't say Forest Service, because it's not. And it's not. We have, hopefully I can explain this. So, because what was happening when the federal government wasn't adverse to the people, I'm talking in the 1800s and into the early 1900s, the federal government actually had land offices and grazing boards that their whole purpose was to get people to use the land, to dispose of it to the people. You know, we know of certain acts such as the Homesteading Act, the Desert Entry Act. These were all the federal government trying to get people to use the land. And out east, you know, the land was useful either through irrigation or through rain and so forth, that people could go use that land, and all of it was claimed up. But out west here, especially west of the Colorado Rockies, it's very arid. So there was only certain areas that people could use at that time. They had to create irrigation systems, waters, and those lands became claimed by people. Well, shortly after World War II, into the 50s and then into the 60s, the federal government saw all this land in the West that was what's called unappropriated land. No one had claimed it. No one had actually claimed the real estate. Even though ranchers had gone on it and claimed the grass, loggers claimed the timber, miners claimed the mineral rights, and there was certain water rights that were claimed on it. No one had actually claimed the real estate. And they unconstitutionally began to draw their maps and put their signs on it. They began to post their signs, and they began to give, number them. And pretty soon everybody just recognized through natural law, really, that it belonged to the federal government. At least that's what they thought. And the states never stood up to it. The states never said, no, you can't do this. They should have, but they didn't. And so now, many, many decades later, it's just something that has happened, and now they've gone to the next level. They've gone to the level where now, and then this is the interesting thing. Legally, we've had to do all this research to survive, but legally, they didn't even claim that they owned it until the late 80s. 1980s, not 1880s, 1980s. They didn't even legally claim that they owned it. They knew they didn't own it. And it's just been through the progress of, or I don't know if we want to call it progress, but there's been generational gaps. These old timers back, like my grandfather and great grandfather, they knew darn well who owned the land. And like my dad's grazing rights, they're deeded with the state of Nevada. They're actually deeded. Not every state did that, but Nevada did. And that's what we argued in court. Look, how can it be the federal government if we own the deed to the grass, really is what it was, to the forage? And that was the argument that we had. And so, in a simple way, that's pretty much what happened. And we have grown to be accustomed, and they have literally taken advantage of that till now. They're controlling 63% of Idaho, and their policy is a no-use policy. That's what they're trying to drive for, a no-use, because it's rooted in a deep, extreme environmentalist agenda. And so that's basically, in a nutshell, the way it happened. So thank you, great question. Right.
So what do we do about the lands that they've sold already to Texans and everybody else? What do we do with that? How do we fight that?
Well, so That's a good question,
Makes me sick.
yeah, because whenever I see federal controlled land sold into private, it really makes me upset, because they're the ones that are benefiting from it, not the people, and they sell it to their buddies and their friends, and they do these land swaps and so forth. There's a tremendous amount of things, I have to be honest with you, that we're never going to be able to unwind. But what I will promise you is that as governor, I will fight the fight to get the land and the resource back in the hands of the people of Idaho. I always say it just kind of as fun, and I have a plan, I have a history, my family has a history. I always say, like, some people are generational, loggers, some people are generational businessmen, some people are generational, horsemen and so forth, and I could go on in different trades, right, from generation to generation. Well, I'm not only have a heritage of ranching, but I also have a heritage of fighting the government. And it's something that, my entire life, I grew up in this. My dad grew up in this. Why? Because we had to fight the federal government just to survive on that desert ranch. And that's just the reality of it. So, right here.
Ammon, first of all, I'm going to give this young man a good reason to be around. I'm going to use the mic.
Oh, excellent. Sounds good.
So, anyway, my question is this. I know you're a very principled person. Let's get into the legislature for a second. We have I think we have problems in the leadership, particularly. We have good legislators there in the House and the Senate fighting the fight. Quite frankly, I think they get discouraged because it's an uphill battle. So, as governor, how would you propose to keep the principles that you have, but yet be diplomatic enough to get the House and Senate to finally do something that will benefit this state?
Great question. Great question. So, I'm going to start off this way. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself, just a little bit, not too much, because I have a business background. When I was about 15 years old, my father came to me and said, Ammon, this ranch is not big enough for the both of us. He actually said it's not big enough for anybody but about two families. And my dad has a whole bunch of kids, and he was basically trying to explain to me that, look, there's just not enough resources here for you to live here and raise your family off of this ranch. And he was warning me and directing me that I was going to have to go find another living. And I didn't like the ideas of that, but that was the reality. So, it's just the reality, right? So I went to a little bit of college, married my wife. Right before I married her, 2 years before, I started a fleet maintenance business where I managed and maintained commercial trucks. And I built one of the largest fleet maintenance companies in Arizona. It was the largest private fleet maintenance company in Arizona. We took care of hundreds of commercial trucks, managed and maintained them, took care of everything about those trucks. So I've hired hundreds of people. I've run a very large business. I've dealt with millions and millions of dollars. And then on top of that, I put together a team, and we built a fleet maintenance shop management software. It was a very detailed software. It took us 3 years. It took us hundreds of thousands of dollars to build it. But we built it, and then I started selling it to other shops, and now it is one of the leading fleet maintenance shop management softwares in North America. And so that's kind of a little bit of my background, and I tell you that because along with, which many of you know, when there have been people that needed help, like the Hammond family, or like my dad. See, I didn't live on the ranch at the time. But my dad needed help. And I came to him, to his help, along with my brothers. The Hammon family in Oregon needed help. And many others have asked me for help. And I was able to unite very quickly thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. Now, the media will say that I'm a disruptor and a divider. Well, that is exactly opposite. You cannot build a company, build a software, and have it be leading companies, leading software. You can't unite tens of thousands of people in just a small amount of time in duress when you're a divider or a disruptor. It's exactly opposite. And so I do have full confidence that I can unite the legislature. I really honestly believe that. And I'm not being naive in it because I have been in that world. They all know me. They all know me. And they don't have to like me. They don't have to like me to follow me. Now, that may seem contrary, but they don't. Because I don't want them to follow me. I want them to follow something that is right. I want them to unite behind principles that are correct. And they can like me or not like me. And I believe that I can unite the legislature. I completely agree with you that the legislature is in terrible need of leadership. Good leadership and leadership in general. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. I do have full confidence, and I look forward to it. Especially as an office of the governor, because there's a certain respect and there is an authority there when that bills and anything legislative has to go through the governor. And so he does have leverage, and that gives an individual the opportunity to use that properly and to lead in a proper way. And I believe that that's what Idaho needs. That's what the Idaho legislature needs. Absolutely. Right back here.
What do you think are the top three? What do you think are the top three problems in Idaho, and how would you address them as governor?
Okay, that's a very good question. So, I would say that we have, and which was mentioned here, we have a good old boys club that's had control of the state of Idaho for many, many decades, and it has become very detrimental to Idaho in many ways. Even to the sense that we are doing things right now, the very same things that 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that Oregon and Washington did. And if we don't change the direction of that, we for sure will become an Oregon and a Washington. That's what we will become. Second, federal overreach. And we have an administration right now that has an agenda to crush those who believe that they have a right to rule their own lives. They absolutely have an agenda. This has been an agenda that they have pushed for a very long time, and they have now got into power. And what is the answer to federal overreach? What is the answer to federal overreach?
Standing up.
Absolutely. What mechanisms have we put in place that our founders put in place to deal with federal overreach? Definitely the Constitution.
Second
Okay.
Amendment.
What's that?
Second Amendment.
The Second Amendment is definitely part of it. What's the first part of the? That's not the answer I'm after, but it is absolutely true. Now, let's make another media headline here, right? So, what's the first part of the Second Amendment?
We the people control the government. The government works for us.
Okay, those are all the right answers. I'm looking for a very specific one, but first of all, I'll go back to the second. What's the first part of the Second Amendment?
Shall not be infringed.
That's the second part. The first part is a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. Saying that the people, militia is the people, right? It's nothing more than the people. An armed people. And it says that an armed people is necessary for a state to be free. That's what the Second Amendment says. And then it says, the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed, right? So absolutely. But I'm looking for a little bit more of a diplomatic answer. but a very crucial answer. Because it is what was talked about here a little bit. Federalism. And that is when the state says no to the federal government. That is the peaceful measure in which the founders established in order for the people to be protected against an overreaching federal government. It is for the state to say no. For the state's resources to be put in action to protect the people from an overreaching federal government. That was the design. That's what it was designed for. And we, our states, have not been doing that. Why? Remember I talked about it at the very beginning. Because of undue obedience. Because the federal government takes our wealth, takes it to Washington, D.C., controls our land and resources, which is where wealth is generated, right? And then dangles it down here for obedience. And the founders said that that is what they called undue obedience. And so the states are afraid if they stand up that they're going to lose the federal funding. Our county sheriffs are afraid if they stand up they're going to lose federal funding. Our schools are afraid that if they stand up that they'll, and not follow their curriculum, that they'll lose federal funding. And they're, all of them have signed what they call memorandums of understanding, MOUs. They've actually contractually agreed to be obedient to the federal government. And so that's number two. That might be number one. It's hard to know, right? And right along with that, politically, so number three, is that if we do not change the growth pattern in Idaho, then Idaho will become what I call the Hunger Games syndrome, where you have a capital city, right? And you have all the districts doing all the work and creating all the wealth and generating all the, the resources, and they're pumping into the capital city so that they can all dress and put their makeup on and their weird clothes and act weird. That's the Hunger Games syndrome. And I know it is kind of funny, it's kind of comical a little bit, but it is the reality.
It is.
And it is a danger.
Yep.
And you have to ask the question, well, why? Why is Boise, and I'll say the same thing when I go speak in Boise, by the way, so I'm not going to change my story here. But why is it growing up, building up? They're building sky-rise apartments right now. Why? They can't build out. Because the federal government's controlling all the land. They cannot build out. So they have to build up. And that's why all these western states basically have become these, when they get more populated, they become part of the Hunger Games syndrome. And we have to make sure that we can build out and grow out. And also, additional to that, or basically right along with that, we are building on our agricultural land. We can't get that back once we build on it. I heard figures last night, I think they're credible, but I haven't confirmed them, that since 2016, 68,000 acres in Idaho have been turned into
Ammon.
residential.
That was 2010 to 2016.
Oh, 2010
That was the last
to
figure.
2016. Okay.
So
Thank you for
that's
the
even
correction.
worse.
So from 2010 to 2016, so we don't have figures from 2016. From 2010 to 2016, 68,000 acres of agricultural land in Idaho has been turned into development land for housing. And now, imagine what's happened since 2014.
Right.
And you can't get that land back. The number one industry in Idaho is what? It's agriculture. So not only are we causing the Hunger Games syndrome, we're also destroying our number one industry. And you can't, it's so difficult, the cost, even if you can pull it off, to try to clean up farmland after you build houses on it. I mean, the cost would be insurmountable. But, I mean, we're just doing just opposite as a state than what we need to do. And so those are the three major problems that I see and identify in Idaho. And they're going to be completely different. You're going to, when a candidate comes up here and talks, he or she is going to talk about something about, well, the legislature this and the legislature that. But that's not really the danger. The danger in Idaho is very real. And it has to do with our land and resources. It has to do with our liberty. It has to do with our freedom, our way of life. It has to do with our economy. And we have to take care of these issues right now. And I believe a governor that understands them and that is willing to fight and truly correct them and unite the legislature in an effort to resolve these issues, I think it is absolutely crucial right now. But I don't believe that I don't believe it's too late. I believe that Idaho has an immense amount of potential to not only just survive, but to prosper. Imagine my daughter, 19, just not last Saturday, but Saturday before, so not even 2 weeks, got just married. And she's 19 years old, and she married her high school sweetheart, who's 19 years old. And they got a lot to learn, but they're on a good path. They're on a good path. And they're going to school and they're renting up in Mossville, and I hope she doesn't turn liberal. I don't think she will, but man, that place up there. Anyway, but sometime they're going to need a home. They're going to need a home. And the average home cost in Idaho, as of a couple months ago, is $403,000. In the metropolitan area, it's $540,000. The average home. Well, what kind of mortgage is that? We all know, right? Most of you are paying a mortgage. They cannot afford it. And the reason why prices are so high is supply and demand. Right? Supply and demand. That's why our agricultural land is being built on, because it's the only supply we have. So why are we doing this to ourselves? Why are we doing this to ourselves? We have to take back our land and our resources. We have to. Or we cannot be a state that even pays its own bills. Did you know that we have to ask the federal government to help pay our own bills in Idaho? And then you got Governor Little giving a surplus, saying that there's a surplus. None of it really makes sense when you think about it. So anyway, that's my very, very long answer. So thank you for being patient with me. Right here.
There was a group that posted a video that seemed kind of edited of you talking about, you talked about your support for Black Lives Matter, just on how they feel like they need to get rid of the police. I wanted to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so it didn't say support for Black Lives Matter. Now that was the media that said that. So what happened there, which was, I'm glad you brought it up, thank you. So what happened there is when Black Lives Matter, so first of all, when all of that began in 2020, and they started rioting across the country, and then they decided that they were going to go to Coeur d'Alene, do you remember that? And they were going to go to Boise. Well, the People's Rights Network, which is a network that I organized, that I developed, actually unified people to stand at businesses in Coeur d'Alene and to make sure that there wasn't rioting going on. We did the same thing in Boise. So I laid that down as some groundwork of some of the things that I had actually done to make sure the businesses and people were not, their businesses and so forth were not damaged. Then what happened was, and there was no damage or business in Idaho, either because they were deterred or they decided not to do it. Probably both. That's becoming the common answer around here. So anyhow, so what happened though is they started doing like weekly protests down at the Capitol building. I don't know if you knew that was going on, but they were organizing themselves and going down there once a week, and they were protesting. And this went on for a couple months, and I think it was in July, right around there, that because they were constantly going down there, well, quote unquote patriots were also going down there, and they were having confrontations, and these patriots were spitting on them and pushing them and expressing themselves in a way that I didn't know that they were doing that, and they weren't certainly doing it under anything that I was organizing. But these one Black Lives Matter member went on the People's Rights Facebook page and said, hey, look, if you guys are about people's rights, what about our right to protest? And I wasn't the one that was administrating the Facebook page, and so they began to communicate back and forth and say, well, what do you mean by that? And he began to say, well, we're getting assaulted and spit on and so forth when we're going down to the Capitol building. And so they brought it up to me, those that were administrating the Facebook page brought it up to me, and I said, well, let's confirm that that's really happening. And they did. They confirmed that that was really happening, that there was actually patriots going down there and confronting them, assaulting them, and spitting on them. And I wasn't okay with that. I wasn't okay with that. So I said, well, tell them that I'm going to take a Lavoy Finicum sign. He was a friend of mine who was shot in the back 3 times by Oregon State Police and left in the snow to die, and he did. And I'm going to go down there with a Lavoy Finicum sign that says Justice for Lavoy. And I'm going to go down there and hold it up. And if I see anybody that is assaulting or infringing upon someone's right to peacefully protest, I'm going to confront them. And so the Black Lives Matter guy conveyed the message to their leaders, and there was a big old thing. It went all the way to the Black Lives Matter leadership and national leadership. And ultimately they came back and they said that I wasn't invited. And so I didn't go. But the media made a big deal out of it and said I joined Black Lives Matter and that I was all about them and so forth. Well, Black Lives Matter is a wicked Marxist organization. It is. But guess what? They have a right to protest as long as they do it peacefully according to the Constitution. And if we don't stand up for that right, guess what happens to ours? And that was the basis that I was doing it on. And I had good reason. I watched because I guess it was about a kind of a police protest or defund the police protest or something to that effect. And I thought, what a perfect time for me to go down and hold up a Lavoy Finicum sign. And anyway, I never did end up going. So that's basically the backstory of what happened. So let's go. Actually, right here, I think he had his hand, then right here, then right here.
I'd like to know when you are governor, what you're going to do to close Planned Parenthood in the state of Idaho.
So good question. So I have already vowed, and you see it all over my website, that on day 1, I will declare that life, and this will be through executive order, and I'm not an executive order type of guy, but I'll explain that a little bit if we need to. But I will declare that in the state of Idaho, life begins at conception, and that it is the state's duty to protect that life. Imagine if anybody here over 85 here? Oh man, I gotta get some older people here. Okay, imagine if, let's say 85 and your children are taking care of you, and the state said it was okay for the children to euthanize them if they're over 85. Because they're taking care of them, right? I mean, wouldn't that be the responsibility of the state to protect that life? Right?
Yeah.
Even though they're dependent on the children? It would be the state's responsibility to protect that life. How is that any different than a life that has just begun? How is that any different? And just to answer anybody who might, I don't know that we have too many of you in here, but yeah, my body, my right, right? And that is absolutely true. When it comes to our bodies, we have jurisdiction over our bodies. We have that right. The state has no jurisdiction over your body. But when you're talking about another life, everything changes. And one of the duties of the state is to protect a person's life from somebody else trying to take it. And so that it's no different. I don't know why we change the rules when it comes to a mother conceiving a child. I don't understand it. It is a life, and it needs to be protected. And it's that simple. And that's what I intend on doing.
And we mentioned the media earlier, and that something that was weighing on my mind. At 14, I watched the media completely eviscerate you and your family and all of us that either were going or supported you. And they painted you as an extremist. As soon as you gain major traction and get towards that Republican nomination, or once you get it, eventually the media is gonna get on you. Are you planning on combating with them, or are you gonna ignore them?
I'm going to keep doing what we're doing. What I'm seeing is that, we keep doing these things right here, and I'm able to communicate with people, and they're able to understand who I am, and they see that it's completely different than what the media has presented. And actually, and I hope many of you will experience this, they actually leave this room upset that they were lied to. And then they become somebody that's actually going out there and advocating for me. And that's the formula to my success. That's what's been happening. That's why we started so early. That's why I'm being so active. I already put 8,000 miles on my RV. That's why I'm meeting every night. That's why Wendy goes to bed really, really tired, right, Wendy? Because we know that they are going to do that. They're going to keep spinning up their lies. And I am going to pretty much ignore them. And I'm going to continue to talk to people. And I'm going to continue to meet with people. And I'm going to continue to ask, just like I'll ask you, to go out, talk to your friends, to have other meet and greets, to put a meet and greet together where you get 20 of your friends together, and we'll come there, or maybe do more of this, because this is what works. And if I can do enough of it, I am certain that in May I will prevail. And so that's our plan, and that's what we're doing, and it works. And videos and all that stuff work too, understanding, going to my website, which by the way is votemoney.com. Also, you subscribe so that I can communicate with you, and you can share videos, you can share emails, you can share these things, because I'm going to give evidence, and I'm going to show you things, and I'm going to communicate with you. The best way to do it is through email, because it doesn't cost a whole lot. And as long as you can stand another email, I ask you to subscribe. All right, right here.
So, you said you're a generational rancher and a business person, right? So the real problem, as I see it with politicians, is we now have a bunch of generational politicians. That they think it's their right because their father or their grandfather was a politician, and then their career. I mean, not to take away from John McCain by any means. I'm a veteran, he was a veteran. But that's what he did. He was in the service, he was in a POW, and he was a career politician. And so was his father before him. And I see a lot of career politicians that no longer care for the people. And then I just want to add, you're basically saying that you don't support anything that is BLM, whether it's Bureau of Land Management or Black Lives Matter.
I think the head is the same on those, right? Yeah, thank you. I did run and actually was the student body president in my high school. But besides that, that's the end of my political career. And people might say, well, why don't you become, legislature or representative or that very clear. There is almost no power in those positions anymore. The power of the state is being held and controlled by the bureaucrats, the full-time employees of the state. I'm going to say that again. The power in Idaho is being held and controlled by the bureaucrats, the full-time employees in the state, and not our representatives. And who is the head? Who is supposed to be the head in control of the bureaucrats? It is the governor. And so one of the things I will do is strip the bureaucracies of their power and restore it back to the legislature and back to the people. Right here and then right in front, right in the back and then right in the front.
I see you've got a thing in your brochure on eliminating immoral property taxes. That's been one of my beefs for years because I bought my property with tax money. I improved my property with tax money, and the minute I improved my property, they raised my property taxes. And then if I don't pay the state my twice yearly rental, they're going to come take it. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
What's your answer?
Well, I'm going to eliminate property tax. And when I came home from federal prison, right, I had a business. When I was thrown in federal prison, I had 27 employees, give or take. And when I come home, I had 3. And we weren't even paying our own bills. And so I was in some financial hardship. And I was getting back on my feet. And then Jim County sends me a bill for over $13,000 because I had my family, my wife, hadn't paid the property tax the entire time I was gone. And I was like, how in the world am I going to pay this at this time, you know? So I was literally facing losing my home. And people in Idaho lose their home every day, especially the elderly people or people that are disabled or lose their job. They're under the threat of losing their homes. Now, just kind of to end that story, I ended up getting my business back going, ended up being able to restore it, get it going again. My software was doing pretty good, but it was in the stage where it really wasn't making a whole lot of money. We built that up and ended up selling it, well, all of them, and I ended up doing really, really quite well. So I was blessed, and I just tell you that so you don't think that I'm in a financial strain right now. Finances are always need to be protected and taken care of, but we were extremely blessed, and I was able to pay off the taxes and do the things I needed to do. However, I became really aware of how we don't really own our homes. As long as we have to pay our taxes until the day we die, we don't really own our homes. And so you can't have private property and property tax in the same house. You can't. You either have one or the other. You can't have both. And so my answer to that is to eliminate property tax. Now, what's the next question when I say that? Go ahead, right there.
How are you going to replace that?
How is the legitimate, let's say the legitimate expenses of government going to be paid? Our sheriff's departments, the other legitimate, our county recorder, our judges. Well, they usually do pretty good off getting tickets and stuff that way. So, but anyhow, yeah, the legitimate purposes, right? That's obviously the answer. And I'm proposing that we replace property tax with a consumption tax. And I'll explain it. Because consumption tax is the only moral way to actually tax the people. Because the people get to decide when they're going to be taxed, if they're going to be taxed, and so forth. And I'll explain this. So I said the average home in Idaho is $403,000. So let's take a $400,000 home. Now, depending on what county you're in, it's anywhere from, on an average, between $2,000 to $3,000 a year goes to property tax. That's average on a $400,000 home. And so if you calculate that up for 30 years, because I'm going to use 30 years to make my point, then you're talking about $60,000 to $90,000 that the state receives or the county receives to pay for its legitimate and in many cases illegitimate purposes. Okay? But for the funds. Now, what I'm proposing is to get rid of property tax because you have to pay that. Even after you pay off your mortgage, right? You have to keep paying it until the day you die. Or until you can't pay it anymore and the state takes your property. So I'm proposing that we take that same $400,000 home, and when it sells and someone purchases it, there'll be say, let's just use a figure of 5%. It could be less, it could be 4, 3. I don't think it needs to be more than 5, and I'll explain why. But let's say that you would pay a consumption tax of 5% when you purchase that home. And that could be rolled into the mortgage. So we're already paying property tax every month, most people are. Some people pay it bi-yearly or yearly. Some people impact it into their mortgage. So you're already paying it. So we're going to roll that in at 5% into the mortgage. $400,000 home at 5% is $20,000, right? And you think, well, that's a far cry from $60,000 to $90,000, right? Well, you can't forget that the average home in Idaho sells 3 to 5 times in a 30-year period. So that would equivalent to $60,000 to $120,000 in revenue for the state. And those numbers are solid. We've done those numbers. We broke down those numbers. But the difference is what? What's the difference? As soon as you pay off your mortgage, you don't have to pay the tax anymore. As soon as the mortgage or the consumption tax is paid, you own your home. And there's really no negative. There's very little negatives, and you get into some of the percentage of some of the interest that is accumulated off the consumption tax into a 30-year loan. That's the only negative to it. But when you're done, you own your home. And it is extremely important that we maintain property rights. What is communism? What is socialism? Socialism is control the means of production, right? Communism is when all things become common. Our property becomes common. It becomes part of the government or part the people claim it. Our lands, our resources, everything becomes common. And it is extremely important that we strengthen property rights, all property rights. And one of the ways to do that is make sure the state can't take our property because we don't pay them a tax. And so I'm proposing
So you kind of took my question. But you also have getting rid of income tax.
Yes.
So that's my next question, but then I have one more after that.
Okay, so I'm going to be quick on income tax. Income tax for the state right now is basically a gravy fund. And I'm proposing we eliminate it. I don't believe we need that gravy fund. I believe we need to downsize the cost of government, and the income tax is just simply not needed. And there's 9 other states in Idaho, or excuse me, 9 other states in the United States that have already eliminated property tax, including Washington, by the way. And so that's my answer. That is an elimination of that tax and downsizing government. And there's many, many ways in which we need to do that. So I'm not proposing replacing that. Yes.
How would you deregulate government, state, federal, like a Donald Trump?
Well, so one is unify the legislature into actually through statutory means deregulating it. But I've said this over and over again. As governor, I could go into that office and never ever do any legislation whatsoever at all for 4 years or 8 years. Not even pass one law, change one statute. And I I could just go in and diminish the size and the power and the expense of the executive branch, the bureaucrats in Idaho, and do the people of Idaho a tremendous amount of good. I mean, I'm talking about downsizing the Department of Education, the CPS, the Department of Health. Who in here would have ever thought that the Department of Health would try to lock us in our own homes in Idaho? But they did. Yeah.
Trump called that the swamp.
Yeah, absolutely. Draining the swamp, right?
Yeah.
You gotta love Trump. He knows how to sell something. Okay, back to your second question.
So, you have had some interesting relationships with law enforcement. How do you improve, going forward as governor, how do you improve not only your relationship, but the state of Idaho's relationship with law enforcement?
Thank you. Great question. Because I have a love-hate relationship with law enforcement, right? I mean, they threw my family in prison for 2 years. Put us in solitary confinement, literally abused us. Wasn't pretty. And it was all done at the hands of law enforcement. And we see that most people, when I say this, have no idea. Idaho, as far as I know, is the only state in the union that arrested, and I take that back, there was one other. But Idaho was one out of the two that actually arrested people for having church during COVID. And who did those arrests? Police. So it is a love-hate thing. It's I love you when you're defending my rights. I'm so grateful for you. I honor you for doing that. Thank you for defending me. And it's I don't like you at all when you're taking my rights or my neighbor's rights. And so the question is, one of the things that I am proposing, and I will do, is empowering the sheriffs. Empowering the sheriffs because they are the only constitutional law enforcement officer in the state. Period. Why? Because they're elected. So when you have a state, let's say Idaho State Police, that's acting out of control, how do the people get them back in control? Well, yeah, I guess that's one way. But there is no mechanism, right? Except the sheriff, I guess. But he doesn't control. What if the city police is out of control? How do you get them back into control? Okay, there you go again. You're answering too clearly. But there is no mechanism. When the sheriff's out of control, what do we do? What can we do as people? We can recall him. We can kick him out. We can not vote him back in. He is accountable to the people. And we've got off by allowing these other agencies to have so much power because it puts it outside of representative government. And it is very important. So that's number one. And then number two is I want to empower the police officers to act according to their conscience. So, for example, if there is an officer who says no to a superior because he doesn't believe that it's constitutional or it is moral, the state will defend that officer. And I plan on empowering officers. Who would want that? Right here. Yep, I'm calling on. Oh, yeah, get the mic. Thank you.
How would you have handled COVID, and are you concerned about election integrity?
Two great questions. Thank you. So I have addressed how I would deal with COVID in depth on my website, votemundy.com. But I'm going to basically make it very clear here, and that is the state does not have jurisdiction over your body. There is nothing anywhere where the people, we the people, have given the state jurisdiction over our bodies. None. That was a gift, a tremendous gift from God. And it is our right to control our bodies. And the only time the state has any authority is if we're using our bodies to infringe upon somebody else's life, liberty, or property. And besides that, there is none. So hopefully that answers the question. As a state, I would have informed, I would have collected honest and true data, and I would have informed the people of the truth and the facts, and allowed the people to do, not really even allow, I don't even like that, because I'm not allowing them, right? They have a right to do that. But I would inform them responsibly with truth of what was really going on, and then they would be able to govern themselves. And that is how a free state is supposed to function. The state has no authority whatsoever to take control of a person's body, an innocent person's body. It's just simply not. Now the second question was what? Remind me.
Election integrity.
Okay, yeah, election integrity. This is a concern. I talked to not to the Secretary of State. I think he would make himself available to talk, but I talked to some of his lead staff, and they told me that everything's okay over there. So I'm just going to take their word for it. I'm not. I explained to them after a long conversation that, look, whether you think it's okay or not, perception is reality. And the people of Idaho are extremely concerned about their election integrity. And so I encourage them to shine a huge light on their processes and to expose it to the people and truly show us if it is truly legitimate or not being compromised. Now, what I'm going to do, because it is a concern, is I am building an army of volunteers right now, and during elections we will man each poll. From what I understand, that in Idaho, you actually vote on a paper ballot, and then it's run through a machine. Those paper ballots can be counted to check it with the machine, which is better than most states or many states, right? And then also, I mentioned to you that I have a tech background. And so if I was able to get access to the code and how it was brought in and all that, I have, not myself, but I have people that work for me and that do a lot of stuff for me that would be able to decipher whether there was corruption in the actual counting of the electronic election process. And so, besides that, I can't really give you a whole lot more, which I think that's fairly solid. We're there making sure that ballots aren't getting thrown in the garbage, right? Or they're not getting, somehow changed, that they're going through the machines, that we can count the paper ones afterwards if there is some question of whether they were changed or if the election was really close and it seems weird. And then also, if we were able to get access to the actual code, then I have the ability and the manpower to decipher it. And so that's what I intend on doing in May and then again in November. Okay. So right here, and then right here. What time are we looking at? You might have to kick me off stage.
We're at 8:30 at this point, or 8:25.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up with a few more questions and give the mic back to the host here, and then you can ask me any question. So when you sign up, this is my little sales pitch here. So when you sign up here, you'll get an email from me, and if you respond back, those actually come to me, and I will respond to you. So far, I've been able to keep up on them, and so they're actually coming back to you from me, and it comes to me, and I respond back. We built this cool little software that makes it so that I can manage a lot of emails quickly. Okay, right here, and then right here.
Yes. I'm a retired educator, and you haven't addressed, I'm sure you have some ideas about the dangers of the curriculum that are being used in some of our school districts. And And we've already lost almost 2 years of children's education, which is so terribly harmful, it's despicable. What about the adoption of the Idaho school boards of critical race theory, which I understand Mayor Janice McLean has proposed that all districts adopt critical race theory right now? I don't know how far that issue is going, but it's been proposed. How do you address that?
Another great question. This is an issue, right? We send our children to school. We trust that they're going to teach them something, and then they have a tremendous amount of influence on our children. I mean, you know, who didn't look up to a teacher or somebody at some point? You know, what child doesn't look up to an adult at some point? The influence that an adult can have on a child, especially in a setting of a schoolroom setting, is tremendous. And it is very dangerous when we have people teaching, you know, terrible, incorrect history and incorrect principles. So I'm going to articulate what I believe the solution is, and it may be a lot different than what you think, what you think or what you think I might say, because we have people in government right now who, I believe, with good intentions, are creating education task force, and they're putting together people, and they put this task force together, and they're planning on creating legislation to really stop this from being taught in our schools. And I believe that's 100% wrong, and I'm going to explain to you why. But I have to get your promise. Before you make a judgment, you have to hear me completely out. Hear me all the way out. Because I'm going to present one side and then the other side, and then see how they come together. So, let's say we have a pizza shop here in Weiser, and we have multiple of them. Now, let's say we got 10 pizza shops. And the government comes along and says, you have to buy all the same ingredients. You have to make it the exact same way we tell you to. You have to sell it for the same price. You have to build the buildings the same way. You have to pay your employees the same price, give them our same wages, and give them the same exact same benefits. And you have to do everything the same. What is your pizza going to be like? It's not going to be that very good. And will it matter where you go? No. It really won't, right? But right now, what do you have? You have an owner who gets to decide what ingredients they're going to buy and make, how they're going to make it, what cheese and what they're going to put on it. They get to decide what price they get to charge you for, how their service is going to be, who they're going to hire, what their building's going to be like, and they can really cater to their customers, right? And you end up with a variety of either really good pizzas or if someone has a bad pizza, bad service, what happens to them? Yeah, they go out of business, right? Or they got to change. Okay? Well, why would our schools be any different? So if we create a task force and we create more regulation and we restrict them more and we make it so the teachers can't teach the things they want to teach, their administrators have no choice, the school boards have no choice, all we've done is created pizza that's the same everywhere and it's terrible. Okay? Now remember, there's two sides of this. So the first side of it is I'm proposing that we free our schools up. We allow the teachers to teach what they want to teach, the administrators to administrate, to do those things according to the way they need to be, our school boards to work the way that they're supposed to work, that we free them up. Okay? Now the thing is, that's scary because some people might say, well, man, there's some socialist Marxists in there. There's some terrible teachers, and there are. There's some terrible administrators, and there are. So we have to take this risk. But it can't go without talking about the customer. Because what happens right now in a pizza shop? A customer gets to decide where they go, right? They get to decide where they spend their money. They get to decide. And if there's a pizza shop teaching critical race theory, well, guess what? We're not going to go to that pizza shop. And so the parents must have full discretion of where the funds go for their student, for their child. Full discretion. Right now, the schools are protected. And I know I went through this. I went through it in the Ammon School District. It was so frustrating, right? 2020. Because they don't care. They don't care if you take your child out. I'll tell you why. Because no matter how many parents take their children out right now, the schools only will receive a 3% decrease in their funding a year. Did you know that? Only a 3%. It can only decrease by a 3%. And they've taken the power out of the parents' hands. Right? Not only that, is they're not allowing the money to actually follow the student. So I plan on bringing those two things together. Freeing up the schools, freeing up the teachers, freeing up the administrators, but doing it with the accountability coming from the parents, because the funds will be determined by the parents. And so that's my answer to that right here.
So then what are you going to do with the Board of Education?
Well, there's a lot of things we're going to downsize.
So you're proposing vouchers, where the parents have the voucher.
Yeah, we might not call it vouchers. It's not exactly vouchers. I also want to make it very clear that I believe foundationally that the government is not a very good educator in most cases. And I believe that the parents have a right to educate their children, and that the state has a duty to protect that. So I want to start, with that. But that's why the parents need, if we're going to have a system of government education, we have to make it so that the parents at least have control of where those funds go, and they can hold those schools accountable. And I strongly believe that is the solution to creating a government education system into a much better system than we currently have. Right here, John, and then I got to go right here because I promised him. This is a follow-up question to this?
It's just dealing with the schools. As some of you may know or may not know, that our governor did take away our rights as parents in a lot of different ways. And Ammon can explain what's happened. Some of the laws, some of the things where our kids are not protected, they're actually they're part of the state when they're with the schools and stuff, and that we don't have any say so. And I know that this took place because we've been fighting against it ever since this all started back when he declared martial law on the state.
Yeah, so under the extreme and other executive order, which we're still under, by the way, he suspended, as far as we know for sure, suspended 127 legislative laws. And many of those laws had to do with parental rights when it comes to our children being in state control. And they're very scary. We can't really understand why he did it. But it is a reality that he did it. And anyway, if you want any more information on that, I can give you that. And I have right here, with the red and black jacket right here.
Yeah, I have a question for you. You're probably familiar with the National Governors Conference?
I am.
And I'd just like to know what your view is and you feel and how you feel the importance of that annual event, or whenever they call a session.
It'll probably be something that I won't attend. And I say that because it was through that conference and through that union, or whatever you want to call it, that most of these COVID things were pushed. And they get the governors together and they push their agenda and they all go out and decide they're going to do it. And that's why you saw governors all over. And what they were doing and what they have done is jockey for a whole bunch of federal funds. Give you a fact number one, and then we're going to wrap this up. Governor Little put us in emergency order on March 13th. It was the same day that President Trump announced $50 billion would go to the states that were in emergency status. We had one COVID case, not death, COVID case, right? On March 25th, Governor Little put us in extreme state of emergency. That was the same day that Nancy Pelosi and President Trump and them announced the $2 trillion COVID relief package for those that were in extreme state of emergency. We had 136 cases and no deaths. He did it for money. And that was a governor's thing across the country because of these associations and coming together through these, whatever they want to call them, almost Sudeo or whatever type government, association governments. I don't think I'll attend. I don't think I have any reason to attend those.
Brad Miller is in charge of the Northwest Governors Association.
No, not surprised. Something I didn't know, not surprised. Okay.
You said that under the emergency order, the extreme emergency order, that the state government's in control of the kids. Is this why I'm hearing over the last week that they're talking about now mandating, supposedly, injecting 5 to 12-year-olds with a lesser dose of the vaccine?
Okay, so I didn't say that the governor was put himself in control of the kids. What the laws, what the suspended governor used his executive power inappropriately, I might say, to suspend 127 laws, legislative laws. He doesn't have the authority to suspend legislative laws, okay? But he did that, and many of them, several of them, have to do with parental rights, the suspension of parental rights when a child is in the state's custody. And I could go and
So that would mean that if my child was at school and they decided that was the day they were going to inject my child, I would have no right to stop that? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not going to say that it goes that far, but what I would say is if the state somehow said that they have custody of your children, then they suspended rights such as how they house them, informing the parents being able to visit, the parents being able to appeal, the amount of adults per children in a facility, the amount of girls and boys bathrooms per children, and many other, including again appealing, the parents being able to know where their child is at, know and have an appeal process. He suspended those. The laws require the state, when they moved their child or did anything with their child, if they're in the state custody, he required the state to inform the parent first. And there's all these checks in there to make sure there's enough adults for children, to make sure, and the best we can see it without, I don't want to, go open this up too much, but basically, what we can determine was going on, which is about as wicked as anything I can imagine, is that they at some point could foresee that they needed to house a whole bunch of children. And they had to get rid of all these blocks, the laws that were kind of restricting and that had a lot of friction when it comes to housing children. And I can specifically show you where these laws were suspended. It's completely documented. I can show it to you. I'm not saying anything that is not, I can't back up factually. And it's been a great concern to many people who are aware of it. And something that I just don't quite understand, to be honest with you.
Ammon,
okay.
Let's take one last question
Thank you.
here, if we can.
One more question, and then we'll wrap this up.
Oh, I thought there was one back. Maybe not. I guess so. The lady right there.
Okay, right here.
With everything that's going on at the southern border, the illegal aliens are going to be trickling into Idaho, and it's going to impact us financially in a lot of other ways. And I'm wondering, is there anything that you as a governor could do to, alleviate some of that?
Absolutely. So there's three types, I'll be quick. There's three types of immigrants. There's those that come here for handouts, there's those that come here for criminal opportunity, and there's those that come here for freedom. And it's very easy to eliminate the first one, and it's within the power of the governor. You stop the handouts. Idaho needs to be different. We don't need to be a welfare state. We don't need to be a handout state. We need to be different, right? It's also what's causing a lot of trouble downtown Boise and what Portland has dealt with, right? We don't want to attract those who want to come here and live off of other people. Just plain and simple. And the way you don't attract those people is you don't give handouts. You stop the handouts, and you stop the federal handouts as well. Two, if our criminal justice system was working properly, the way our founders designed it to work, people wouldn't be coming here for criminal opportunity. They'd be like, don't go to Idaho. Don't go to Idaho. And you can't get anything in Idaho, so don't go there for a handout. Go to Oregon. And we were like, Oregon's already messed up so bad, you can't mess it up any further, so just go to Oregon. Right? And the third type are the people we want. We want people here that want to work, that want to be free, that want to live according to our principles. We want them here. And we have to be wise enough to decipher the difference between the three. We want those that want to be free to come here and join us. We do not want those who want a handout or criminal opportunity. And we got to be careful not to lump them all into one basket. Right? And so that's my answer. Yeah, the state has a lot of ability to control that. Also, the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment gives the state the right to control things, and this idea that President Biden can force a whole bunch of people here, I think is outside the authority that he has. And so that's my answer. All right, I want to thank you for your time.
And again, if you're not part of this organization, you want to be, there's a sign-up sheet in the hallway.